welcome to or welcome back to my channel, Knee Knits. My name is Amy and here I talk about all things knitting, and today is podcast episode number 50 where I'll be sharing what I've been knitting for the past 2 weeks. In today's episode, I have a handful of projects to share as always. I do have one finished object which includes my Sophie Shawl that I'll be discussing, and I also have progress updates on a lot of different sweater projects, a lot of textured projects. Not a lot of my projects right now are stockinette stitch, which is kind of rare for me, so that'll be fun to go over. I can't believe we're on the 50th episode. Filming these is one of my favorite things to do, and it's been over 2 years doing this, so happy 50th episode. Today I am wearing my Aurelia pullover. This is a sweater pattern by Sari Nordland, and I had knit this out of Sorella Yarn Classic DK in the color Folklore, which is this really fun pale purple gray color. This is actually my first time wearing this in a sit-down episode. I think I've had a handful of other finished sweaters since then that I've been wearing, and so this was the first opportunity I had to put it on. So really excited to have it on for this episode and show it in action for the next 45 minutes or so. So starting with the finished object of today's episode, that is the Sophie Shawl, which was actually just a new cast on in the previous podcast, and I definitely spent a lot of my knitting time on this project over the past few weeks. It really captured my attention. I just really enjoyed knitting on it, so I was able to finish it up relatively quickly. If you're unfamiliar with the Sophie Shawl, it is a pattern by Petite Knit. It is a triangle shawl that is knit from tip to tip, and it features garter stitch and I-cord border. The Sophie Shawl, you can knit it out of, I think the suggested yarn weight is worsted, but of course because it's a shawl and it's garter stitch, it's pretty variable with what kind of yarn you can use, what kind of weight you can use. I used an Aran weight yarn called Cielo from Holsgarn, and this was sent to me for the project. It's this really light and fluffy chainette construction alpaca wool nylon yarn, and this is in the color Granny, which is this gray, slightly variegated color. I thought it was the perfect yarn choice for the Sophie Shawl because I want it to be very soft and very light and fluffy, and this was the perfect fit. You can see that this yarn has that chainette construction, which adds to the airiness of it. It's very springy and stretchy and has a little bit of kind of that fluffy look, but it's not hairy like a mohair, and it's also not hairy like some blown yarns that have loose fibers blown into them. These fibers are pretty contained, so although the finished knit does have, some halo and some fluff to it, it's not like a hairy fabric, if I could say that. Cielo comes in 50-gram balls, so I had 5 and I wanted to use up as much of the 5 balls or the 250 grams as possible. So I did knit my Sophie Shawl on size 5.5mm needles, and I was aiming for size large of the project, but I didn't really follow the pattern numbers for getting size large. I really just cast on, I started knitting, and then when I got near the midpoint of my yarn, which was about 125 grams, I stopped the increases and then went on to the decreases, which I believe my midpoint is right about here. So it's a pretty sizable shawl, which I'm really happy about because I wanted a lot of versatility with wearing this Sophie Shawl. You can see how wide it is at the widest point. This is probably if I were to estimate, maybe 16 inches wide. I haven't measured it just yet, and it's the perfect size in my opinion. I just tried this on earlier today. It actually just finished drying after blocking it, and I was trying to style it a bunch of different ways, and it really does have a lot of versatility. I can wear it as a single wrap with a single knot around the front. I could wear it just over my shoulders. I was able to do kind of the hood conversion, which was really fun and super trendy right now. So overall, I'm really excited at the potential for using the Sophie Shawl. In total, I used 219 grams of the Aran weight yarn for this size shawl. Again, really happy with the finished dimensions of it. I'm really happy with the finished fabric as well. Part of me was a little bit worried that it would be very dense. The Cielo is a very thick yarn, and because it's so squishy, it can be knit on a variety of different size needles, and depending on how small your needles are, this yarn will compress to fit onto that small needle size, versus if you pick a larger needle size, it will expand and fill the gap. gaps. So very versatile. I think on the label it suggests like a 5.5 or a 6mm needle. So I had done 5.5 and I was worried while I was knitting it, like, should I have gone up to a 6mm needle? The garter stitch was a little bit stiff and it didn't have that like flowiness that I see in other people's Sophie shawls. So part of me was worried, but blocking fixed everything as it normally does. So really glad that it really loosened up. I blocked this like I block all my projects. I dunked it in a big bowl of cool water with some wool wash in it. And whenever I block my knits, I have a little hack to make the drying time go by super quickly. And I always put my damp knits into my washing machine and run it on the spin cycle only. So not adding any water to the washing machine. My washing machine labels it as drain and spin, but it wrings all the water out and it doesn't damage the knits. And I actually blocked this yesterday morning and it's completely dry today. And I just had to lay it on my regular clothes drying rack and it was dry like in less than 24 hours. So really excited to see that after I'd finished blocking, the garter stitch really opened up, but not in a way that was like crazy different. It just adds some more flow to the fabric. And I think that this design, like the Sophie shawl and both the Sophie scarf, have a kind of ingenious design where garter stitch that tends to stretch vertically like that, but you have I-cord borders that withholds the stretching a bit. So it really does have a lot of structural integrity while still having a lot of drape and flow. If I were to knit this again, I think I would maybe knit this on 6mm still, but I'm not unhappy with my choice to knit this on 5.5mm needles. This is definitely a project that I see myself wearing a lot, especially this cold winter. I love the ability to style it different ways, and it kind of removed a project that I had intended to knit next, like kind of off my queue, unintentionally. So I was planning to start the My Jo's hood by Nordic Knitters, which is a garter stitch kind of balaclava or hood, and I have gray yarn in my stash that I was going to use for it, but now that I have this and it's like garter stitch in gray, I don't really know if I need two. I do kind of want to still knit the My Jo's hood pattern just as kind of a comparison and see how that pattern works. It's unlike something that I've seen before and it seems like a really fun project. So I don't know, I was gonna knit that next, but now I might not because I feel like I don't need two gray knit garter stitch hood items or scarf items, but we'll see. I could always knit that as a gift or just maybe find another yarn that's not gray and knit that as well. Really happy with this finished project and really happy with the yarn. It was overall a really fun knitting experience. I find that if there are projects that I finish really quickly, it's because I just really loved all aspects of it, whether it be the yarn or the pattern itself or the excitement of using the finished object, and this checked off all those boxes, so I'm really happy with my Sophie shawl. Next up, I have to share my works in progress, but before we dive into the works in progress, I do want to take a few moments to thank the partner of today's video, Foreo Sweden. I have been a customer of Foreo for years, and just last year they sent me their UFO 3 Ultra Hydration device. I've been using this since last summer and have really enjoyed all the benefits of this little product. Though this device is small, it has a lot of things packed into it, including LED light therapy, cooling cryotherapy, warming thermotherapy, and T-sonic massage. In the dry, cold winter months, I really find myself having dry skin. Sometimes it gets a little bit flaky, and so this device really helps keep my skin very moisturized. It is proven to increase moisture in your skin up to 126% with just one use. I use the UFO 3 as part of my skincare routine with the UFO activated masks that give my skin that extra plump glow. To use the UFO 3, I will grab my favorite activated mask for that day. Just this morning, I used the H2O Overdose and I attach it to the device. If you want a more custom treatment, you can also use the app to customize with your selected LED colors or the temperature of your device. I really just like using the activated masks because it's very simple to just hit play and go. Since incorporating the UFO 3 device into my skincare routine, I've seen a dramatic improvement in the elasticity and the hydration of my skin. If you're interested in any of the Foreo products like the UFO 3, definitely click the link in the description to shop as they are having a Valentine's Day special going on now. Right now, the Valentine's Day deals are up to 40% off on Foreo products. If you use my coupon code 10NE, you can get an additional 10% off your purchase. The UFO 3 is rarely on discount, so now is a great time to shop. Feel free to treat yourself for Valentine's Day or get a gift for someone special from Foreo by using the link in the description. Thank you, Foreo, for partnering with me on today's video, and and now I'll get back to the project. Okay, so going into my works in progress. The first one I have to share is an old one. This one, I don't know why it's lingering so long. In fact, I got a question on Instagram if I had frogged it because it's been that long since I've worked on it, which was funny to me. Not funny that that person asked because it made sense, but it's just funny that I don't know why this project has been on my needles since literally last summer. And that is my Ingrid Sweater. Here it is. So this is a pattern by Petite Knit. It is a oversized drop shoulder sweater that features all over texture. There is a variety of different textures on here like lattice and ribbing and double moss stitch. And the yarn that I'm using for mine is Valley Yarns Northampton in the color Ocean Heather, which is this really beautiful teal color. So I believe last time I showed this on the podcast, I had the body all finished, the collar was finished, but I still had to do the sleeves. So I have since picked up and knit most of the first sleeve. So there it is there, and sorry, my stitch row counter is dangling. But the sleeves so far have been an okay experience. I have been warned that the Ingrid Sweater pattern doesn't give very clear instructions on the sleeves because you still have to maintain the texture pattern while doing some sleeve decreases, and Petite Knit is kind of just like, figure it out on your own. So I feel like maybe that's the reason why I haven't really wanted to work on this, because sometimes I can be a lazy knitter and I don't really want to do any like mental effort to figure out how to knit something. That's why I pay for patterns, because someone already did the mental work for me. And the sleeve, once you get past the short rows, I will say the short row shaping on the sleeve is pretty well explained, but then once you get past the short row shaping and you have to do the tapered sleeve with the stitch patterning, it's not very straightforward because you have to decrease, but then you have fewer stitches than what is needed to complete the motif. For example, with the lattice is probably where it gets the weirdest, because you know, you're decreasing out in the lattice pattern, but then how do you finish the lattice pattern? So I'll be honest, I don't really know what happened with mine, but you can see that there's like some weird stuff going on. Like I had started the lattice down here and then it continued over here, and then there's a much bigger gap here compared to the rest of the motif. Now this is on the underside of the sleeve, so the potential for someone to actually see it is very low, which gives me a little bit of reassurance that it's okay, that it's not perfect and looks kind of irregular. And then that continued to get weird with the 2x2 ribbing section as well, because you have to decrease out, but you're not decreasing out with like intervals of 2 or 4. So I ended up with a weird column where one of my 2x2 ribbing, like this column of 2 knits just becomes a column of 1 knit stitch, and it just looks like weird. In hindsight, now I understand like, okay, I could have done that a little bit differently to make it look a little bit neater, but just in general, I'm just like disappointed with how these decreases are looking, and it kind of discourages me from working on the project. But I just need to power through, finish up this first sleeve, and then do the second sleeve either the same way or differently. I don't really care, but I definitely want to get this project done and off the needles. So I also have been burned by the Ingrid Sweater sleeves. I thought maybe I could figure them out, but be warned, there, I just wish Petite Knit actually wrote in decreases into the chart like most other pattern designers. I feel like that was lazy on her part and kind of frustrating, but regardless, I think this is going to be like a really cute sweater to wear. So I'm hoping that the motivation of having the finished object will drive me to continue working on this. It's just been on my needles for so long. I just have lost interest. I've had more excitement for other projects, so I've been focusing my time on other projects, but would love to see this wrapped up soon. So there's my Ingrid sweater, almost done. I can't promise it'll be finished by the next podcast, but one can hope. The next projects I have in the needles are examples of things that are just making me more excited to knit them. So like I have the Ingrid in front of me, and then I have like my Vivienne in front of me, and I've just been choosing to work on the Vivienne. So this is my next work in progress, the Vivienne Pullover. This is a pattern by Sari Nordland. It's a drop shoulder cabled design knit in sport weight yarn. The yarn that I'm using for mine is Durarum Natura Ulysse in the color Merlot. It is the yarn that Sari Nordland used in her pattern samples, so it's like the suggested yarn. Love this color Merlot. It does remind me a lot of my Lana vest, which is also cabled and in this dark red color. I love the vest. excited to have kind of a matching pullover, even though they're totally different patterns. So at this point I have finished the back panel, and then I did pick up for the front right shoulder here. Now, this is an example where with drop shoulders, they'll tell you to pick up the left shoulder next or the right shoulder, and I am a left-handed knitter, so I kind of have to mentally swap and read the other chart for that. So in these pattern directions, I had finished the back panel. I put those stitches on hold, and then it says to start at the top left corner and pick up the left shoulder, but because I'm a left-handed knitter, that means I have to pick up at the right shoulder and follow the right shoulder chart. So that's what I'm doing here. That was a little just lefty tip. I've gotten some questions about left-handed knitting. I would love to make a dedicated video to things that you need to swap in your mind when reading patterns that are written for right-handed knitters. Haven't done that yet, so there's a little sprinkling of a tip. One day I will post that video, but it's not today. So yeah, I just picked up and then I'm working on the front shoulder panel. There are some increases as you form the neckline, and then I'll do the same to the other side. Pretty standard drop shoulder construction. I do think it adds some excitement to what could be considered kind of a slog of a knit. This knits up pretty slowly. There's a lot of texture going on. The honeycomb stitch I have spoken about before is pretty tedious. I do knit it without a cable needle, but still it's slow, especially if you're someone like me that knits a lot of just stockinette in the round. This feels like it takes ages to create just this little piece of fabric. So I am enjoying knitting it, regardless of it being slow. I think this is still a very enjoyable knit. The pattern is very easy to memorize. I already have it memorized, and the cables are infrequent enough where it doesn't feel like there's too much to keep track of, like the Aurelia. This one is pretty straightforward, and doing the piecewise kind of drop shoulder construction definitely is keeping my interest because I have little goal lines to reach, finish the back panel. Okay, finish that. And what's the next step? Oh, finish the front shoulder. All right, well, I just finished the increases for this front shoulder, so now I'm already on to the next shoulder. So it's just fun to have those milestones to reach with a project, and is keeping my interest with an otherwise kind of slow and somewhat tedious project. I have really enjoyed knitting with this yarn. Duraramatura Ulyss is a woolen spun yarn, and it is 100% wool. It's very light and springy, and I feel like the texture is different than other yarns that I've used before. It kind of has a very matte finish, like a matte texture, and something that I've noticed specifically with this dark color is that it attracts a lot of lint. So I don't know if you can see it all in this clip, but if you see little specks of lint, it's just something that I've noticed. It seems like a magnet, so I don't know if that'll become annoying when I start to wear this sweater. It's just something I've noticed while knitting it. I do wonder if it probably does the same thing if you're using a light colored yarn from here, but maybe you can't see the lint as much as on this dark color. And we don't even have any pets in the house, so I can't even imagine if we did have a pet. I feel like this is a magnet for lint and pet hair and stuff like that. But it is really soft, it is really light and airy. I feel like there is a great benefit to picking a semi-woolen spun or a very light yarn for something with cables, because cables use up a lot of yarn, so your project can get very heavy very fast. Like for example, my Aurelia pullover is knit out of a 100% superwash DK weight yarn, and I used almost 500 grams of yarn for this sweater, and it doesn't even have an insane amount of positive ease. It's a pretty neutral fitting sweater, so it feels very heavy and dense at some points. And it is a sport weight knit, but because the yarn is so light, I feel like it's not going to feel heavy in any way when it's finished. It's just going to feel like a really casual pullover, even though it has so much texture. I'm realizing I forgot to talk about needle sizes and my size for these projects. Like the Ingrid Sweater, I was knitting that on 4.5mm needles, and I was making the smallest size in the pattern. I'm sorry to jump back, but just in case you were curious, for this one I am knitting this on 4mm needles to meet gauge, and I'm knitting the second size in the pattern, which is the suggested size for my measurements. So that is my Vivienne Pullover. Next up is my Traveler Hoodie. The Traveler Hoodie is a pattern by Andrea Mowry. It is a drop shoulder oversized hooded sweatshirt that features this textured kind of garter bump pattern. It is a pattern that Andrea Mowry has adapted to many different forms, so if you follow Andrea Mowry or most knitters, you're probably pretty familiar with the whole Traveler line. I am knitting the hoodie version, although there are two versions of the pattern where you can opt for a crew neck sweater or do the hoodie. I'm really excited to make the hood, and it is knit bottom up, which is why it might look a little funky right now. Actually, it looks pretty good in this angle. This is really starting to look like a sweater. Last time I showed this on the podcast, I had finished the body in the round and was ready to split for the armholes. So I did do that, and I just finished the knitting straight portion for the front panel. And I think the next step for me is to like do all the shaping for the neckline and stuff. So let me talk about the yarn that I'm using. The Traveler is a sport weight pattern, so I am using Knit Picks High Desert Sport. This is a 100% American wool yarn. It's a blend of merino and merino rambouillet, and this color is called Ponderosa Heather, which is a really nice olive green color. It does have a little bit of heathering. The High Desert line has a variety of different colors. Some are heathered and some are solid. So you can kind of see the depth in this yarn skein here. It is very subtle, but it definitely is enough to give it a little bit more dimension than just a flat color. I am knitting the second size in the pattern for myself, which was the suggested size for my bust circumference, and it should give me 10 inches of positive ease when this is all done and finished. So very oversized, but I really like the look of it with the drop shoulders. I think it's gonna look really nice. I am trying to keep it kind of cropped too, so it should have the balance of it's oversized in width, but it's going to be cropped in length, so it won't overwhelm my frame. Now, the suggested needle size for this pattern is a 3.75 millimeter needle for the body. However, to meet gauge with this yarn, I ended up needing to size up to 4.5 millimeter needles, which honestly was kind of surprising to me. I was a little bit worried, like, is that too much of an increase in needle size? But it is interesting when you look at needle sizes available. 3.75 is one, and then the next needle size is 4 millimeter needles, which is only a 1/4 of a millimeter difference, and then the size after that is 4.5 millimeter needles, where normally other intervals between needle sizes is about 1/2 of a millimeter. So I guess it made sense that I had swatched with 4 millimeter needles, increasing by just a 1/4 of a millimeter diameter, and it just wasn't enough to get gauge, so I just had to go up one more needle size. So it feels like a big jump, but I think looking at the sizes of needles available, it kind of makes sense. I was worried about the fabric maybe being too gapey because it's a sport weight yarn on 4.5 millimeter needles, but I don't see any gapiness at all. It really is filling out, so happy with how the fabric is knitting up so far. Now let's talk about measuring this pattern, because I actually had quite the time these past 2 weeks figuring out how long to make the body before splitting for sleeves. And last time on this podcast I was showing this and I said, oh, I'm ready to split for sleeves, and I was actually incorrect when I said that. I think I had only knit like 6 bumps, and in the pattern it says to knit the body length to 7 inches, but it just says 7 inches. It really doesn't specify if that is stretched or unstretched, or if that 7 inches is supposed to mean like when you block your sweater it'll become 7 inches, so therefore your unblocked measurement is not 7 inches. And I was struggling because this stitch pattern is such an accordion, and there's so many different ways that it could measure depending on how you measure it. So I really wasn't sure if it meant measuring it, just put it down on a table and measure it, don't touch it, don't stretch it, or if it meant stretch it and then measure it, or I guess those are the two options. So I had measured it stretched because I was thinking of like the blocked length, and that turned out to be wrong because I was just questioning. I was like, this seems way too short. And then I went to Andrea Mowry's pattern photo and I was trying to count the bumps in her sweater before it split for the underarm. And I had counted like 11 or 12 of these bumps, and I only had like 6. So I was like, I feel like I'm measuring it wrong. Basically, I did some math with the schematic and the row gauge of the pattern, and based on the photos of Andrea Mowry's sample and the instructions in the pattern, I concluded that the 7-inch measurement meant unstretched. Like, just leave it alone, it should be 7 inches. So that meant I had a lot more knitting to do, which was fine. I'm glad that I figured that out beforehand and not after the fact. So I ended up doing like 11 bumps here before splitting for the sleeves, just putting this on the table and then putting a ruler on top of it. So I'm hoping that that is fine for the body length. Like I said before, this is a very cropped pattern. The length of size 2 is the length that I want it based off of my measurements and based off of other sweaters I've knit. So I am knitting this to pattern without any modifications so far. I do know a lot of people who knit the Traveler expand the body quite a bit because they don't really want the cropped fit. So just keep that in mind if you are also working on this pattern. So flipping this right back side up, yeah, this has been a different construction for me. I've enjoyed it so far. I've never done a drop shoulder where you have to cast on stitches at the underarm, so that's new to me. I know it's a very like classic Andrew Mowry construction method, but overall I have 2 thumbs up for this pattern so far. I think it's going to be super cute. I love the way the fabric is knitting up. I love the color, and it's been really fun to knit. I think these kind of bumps or the stripes, they are kind of motivating me to keep knitting on it, because once you finish one kind of bump, you want to get to the next one. And again, with like the piecewise construction where it's like, oh, I just finished the front panel and now I have to do some shaping, and then, oh, I got to do the back panel. It's like that milestone concept that is keeping me really excited about the Traveler Hoodie. The last project I have to share is a new cast on, and that is the Franky Sweater. It's a pattern by Sandnes Garn. So excited to show this one because this is the yarn that I'm using. Oh my gosh, it's absolutely glowing on camera. So I had this yarn from Ruby and Roses. This is the Rose Cloud base, which is a Surrey alpaca lace weight yarn, and this is in the color Glowing Indigo, which is such an accurate color name because it really does glow. I forget what pre-order collection this was from. It might have been like a flowers collection, but as soon as I saw on Instagram this bright neon blue Surrey yarn, I just knew that I needed it for a sweater. I have one Surrey lace alpaca sweater that I used this kind of yarn held double. I think it was like a Sorella yarn, and that fabric is just so dreamy, and I knew I wanted like a different kind of sweater with that same yarn. So this is a 75% baby Surrey alpaca and 25% mulberry silk yarn. Lace weight 50 grams skein, has 328 yards. So I've been toying about what kind of project I wanted to do with this. Obviously, it needed to be something mostly stockinette because there was going to be no point in like a lot of texture for this Surrey yarn. You know, I had thought about the Cumulus blouse. I had also considered the Port Sweater by Ozetta because a lot of people have knit that in Surrey and it looks great. And the Franky Sweater is a pattern by Sandnes Garn that I've had my eye on for a while. It is a raglan sweater, but it's kind of like a different raglan where it has a really elegant neck shaping or shoulder shaping that almost kind of looks like a saddle shoulder shaping, like my Carl Johan sweater, but it isn't a true saddle shoulder. It really is kind of like a raglan, and it was a construction that I just couldn't get out of my head, and I just knew that that would be perfect for this blue yarn. I think maybe I was also motivated by the fact that the model wears that really bright green color in the Franky sweater, so it's kind of like the same kind of neon color energy that I wanted to mimic. So this is what I have so far in the pattern, and I do want to talk about how I got the Franky sweater pattern, but I think I'll talk about what I've knit so far first, and then I'll get into acquiring the pattern. So it is a raglan construction in the round, and I just cast on, I think yesterday. Yeah, yesterday was Friday, so this is like my start of the weekend, new cast on. So I am holding 2 strands of the Surrey yarn held together. The gauge for this pattern is 18 stitches per 4 inches. So I am using 4.5mm needles to get gauge. It is the suggested needle size for this pattern. I just started this yesterday, so I don't have much progress on it yet. This is a pattern that you start by knitting flat. You go back and forth to raise the back neck, and then you join in the round. You can see where I have my markers for some raglan stitches. Of course, they're kind of hidden, and it's hard to see any stitch definition with this type of yarn, but you can kind of see some of the shaping starting to take place. This is the front of the sweater, and yeah, it's just gonna be a really fun project. I think it's gonna be kind of like a mindless project once I get the rhythm of the raglan shaping down. This will just be a nice stockinette piece that I can turn to when I'm tired of my textured knits that I have on all of my needles right now. Because I am holding 2 strands of this yarn together, I'm debating whether or not I should alternate skeins. Alternating skeins with this hand-dyed yarn would mean I have 2 balls here, and then I would have another set of 2 balls that I alternate between to avoid any color pooling or lines. Because I have 2 separate skeins held together, I'm not sure if that's necessary, but at the same time I'm wondering if, even though it is 2 skeins held together, when I switch to the next 2 skeins held together, if either one of those skeins has like a major difference in color appearance, it might still be visible. So like, I don't want to have to alternate skeins because it just makes things simpler, but if I do, I don't think it'll be that big of a deal. I did have some questions on alternating skeins. My methods that I use for those are helical knitting if I'm knitting in the round in mostly stockinette. So for this, I would opt for helical knitting, which I'll link below a tutorial for. And if I am not doing stockinette in the round, for example, with this sweater, I did the yarn forward method, which I will also link a video tutorial for in the description box. So I don't know, let me know if any of you have done kind of a similar project where you have 2 strands held together and it's hand dyed, if you did alternate groups of skeins or if you didn't, and whether or not that worked out or not, let me know. But let's talk about the Franky Sweater pattern and how I got it. So the Franky Sweater pattern is not something that you can purchase as an individual pattern download from Ravelry or from the Sandnes Garn website. It is found in one of their magazines. This is called Soft for Women 2202. It is actually the cover pattern. These are hard to find in the US. My go-to place for Sandnes Garn catalogs, and I say go-to, I've purchased one prior, so the one place that I purchased it from before was Mother Knitter, which is a shop in New Jersey that they ship through the US. And you did have to purchase a project quantity of yarn from the booklet to be able to get the booklet, but they did have, you know, the full printed books. However, when I decided I was going to knit the Franky sweater, I went on to Mother Knitter's website and they no longer have the printed books. They only gave me the option to purchase the yarn for the Franky sweater, and then I would get emailed a digital download of just the Franky sweater pattern, not the entire book. So that was kind of disappointing, and I quickly flipped through their whole kind of website, and it seems like most of their Sandnes Garn patterns are now sold that way. Like, I don't think they have these books on their website anymore, which is very unfortunate because there aren't that many retailers for them. So of course I did my Googling. I tried to find other places in the US that I could order from, and there are other retailers who do still have some printed booklets for sale, but this specific copy was sold out from the few shops that I was able to find. So I then turned to other global retailers that would ship to me in Massachusetts, and I did find Line A Tricot, which is a yarn shop in France, and they were selling the booklets, and you didn't have to purchase a project quantity of yarn for them. So for me, that was kind of a win because I already had yarn for the project, and I did have an interest in this whole booklet, not just the Franky sweater. There are a lot of really great patterns in here, including the Amy slipover. That's something that I could totally see myself knitting in the future. The Gia zipper sweater looks beautiful. The Lou Genser, that's also a great one. Like, this just seemed like it had a lot of hitters and that I would get a lot of value out of having the whole booklet rather than just an individual pattern. So Line A Tricot was able to ship to me this book, and because I was paying for shipping all the way from France, I did want to make it worthwhile. So I picked up 2 other books that they were selling that I've had my eye on. The first one is this Norwegian Icons from Sandnes Garn. This is number 72. And then I also got Laine Nordic Knits, which I've seen here in the States, but I was trying to optimize shipping, and I optimized it by getting 3 books. If I had 4 books in the cart, the shipping went up too much. If I had 2 books in the cart, it was like the same price as 3 books. Honestly, really excited with my purchase. I think in total I spent $60 US on these 3 copies. That includes shipping, and then to me that seems like a good value. Obviously, like, the shipping was way more expensive than if I could find it here in the US, but, and same with Canada. I had searched some Canadian retailers and they also were sold out of this specific copy. So That was the best I could do, but I'm honestly really excited with all 3 of these books because there are just so many patterns in here that I would be really excited to knit one day. In the Norwegian icons, it is pretty much all colorwork patterns, if not all colorwork, yeah. And I'm not a big colorwork knitter, but I really want to be. I think 2025, I didn't make an official goals video, but one of my goals in 2025 is to do some colorwork garments. These are definitely pretty advanced. I don't think I would start with any of these, but just some of them, like the Islander sweater for both men and women, that's like so cool looking. I can't pronounce half of these, but the slalom, that looks really great. The Boverton, like, wow, definitely want to knit those sometime in my future. And then Nordic Knits is a special edition of Laine magazine that has 17 patterns, which is a pretty high amount of patterns for Laine publications. And it also included a interview with Petite Knit, which I really wanted to read. So also these patterns have a good amount of color work that I would be interested in knitting, as well as just some like staple textured knits that I could totally see myself knitting and adding to my wardrobe. For example, the Hilda sweater definitely looks like something that I have an interest in, and this might actually be a good pick for a first sweater because it is a circular yoke and just uses 2 colors. I really like this pattern. It's knit out of Tugul fingering, and I've heard really good things about that yarn, so definitely have an interest in that pattern. The Erd as well also looks like a great, somewhat simple pattern for a colorwork beginner knitter. The Walnut or Walnut Pullover, I love this one. It is knit bottom up, so maybe I'm hesitant to do it, but it just looks like a stunning design. And maybe once I get some colorwork skills under my belt, I can move on to things like Anna's Fana. This looks so cool. Like, that's such a cool looking jacket. And the Yartrosa, this one also stunning. Would love to knit that one day. So these are some new publications that I've added to my collection. I love all of them. Totally can see a lot of potential. I do wish that the Franky Sweater and just Sandnes Garn patterns in general are more accessible. I don't know why they like only restrict the sale like within the catalog, or now it seems like you can only buy them as kind of like a kit with the getting the yarn and then the digital download. I personally feel like they could do pretty well with just individual pattern downloads like any other designer, but I don't really know their business structure, so I'll just leave it at that. I am glad I was able to get a copy of the Franky Sweater. I was on the hunt for a similar pattern like that used a similar raglan construction for that kind of mimicking a saddle shoulder shape, but couldn't really find anything. So if you have any suggestions for other people in case, you know, they're not able to get the Sandnes Garn catalog and want to knit something similar, feel free to put that in the comments, and if I find something similar, I will of course let you guys know. I did forget about one project, so the Franky Sweater was not my last project of the episode today. I have a pair of socks that I started. These are the Harriet socks, a pattern by Summer Lee from the Sock Project book, and they're a cuff down sock that feature simple cables that go down the leg and then down the foot. The rest is all stockinette. I'm using a really fun yarn for this. This bright red color is something I've really been wanting to knit with, and I had this skein of Stroll from Knit Picks. This is in the color Strawberry, which is just a perfect bright red color. Knit Picks Stroll is a sock yarn at 75% superwash merino and 25% nylon. It's actually my first time knitting with Stroll. I have a handful of colors that I bought but just haven't used them yet, so I was really excited to try it out. It's an extremely soft yarn. It is sold in 50-gram balls, so I just have the one ball for my pair of socks, so I'm aiming for kind of like a shorty sock to get, you know, the pair of socks out of 50 grams. And I am knitting these with my new Addi FlexiFlips. This was also not just an excuse for me to try out the Stroll, but also an excuse for me to try out the FlexiFlips, which you guys had a ton of interest in. So I am really intrigued by them. The FlexiFlips are sold by Addi, and they are a combo of a DPN and kind of like a circular needle. They do have the flexible cord in the middle. These are the 8-inch length, so I did look up online that they do have these in 10-inch lengths and 8-inch lengths, so this is 8-inch, which I think is the preferred length for socks, and these are in US size 1 or 2.25 millimeter needles. Now, I told myself I would finish an entire sock with these before I sort of officially posted my review of the FlexiFlips. There was a lot of interest, so I think I am gonna do kind of like a standalone, like very quick quick video about them when I'm done, but to share with you guys my first impressions. My first impressions are that this is a really cool idea. I think they are a great improvement upon DPNs, and the knitting process is very similar to DPNs. As someone who uses mostly magic loop for socks and for small circumferences and is a fan of magic loop over DPNs, I think that these got some getting used to because the maneuvering of the needles and the holding like all of the tips in your hand is very similar to using DPNs rather than magic loop. So I feel like at first I didn't really love using them strictly because the jump from magic loop to having 3 needles like DPNs was like very different for me. But now that I've gotten through, you know, the heel flap and the shaping of the sock and I'm more used to them, I can say that I do enjoy them quite a bit. I'm not quite sold on whether or not I would choose to use these over magic loop method, but so far I think they are a great improvement on regular DPNs if you are a DPN sock knitter. This pattern is really fun. I've been really enjoying kind of the simplicity of it, but it still has a little bit more interest than just a plain stockinette sock, and I think in this red color I feel like it just is the perfect pairing for these cables. I did do a regular heel flap and gusset as specified in the pattern, and this is the first sock I have, so once I finish this one, we'll have to knit the second sock, and I think that's all I can say about my Harriet socks. Those are all of my knitting projects, and I don't have any acquisitions besides the booklets that I just shared. I did, however, want to give an update on spinning. In case any of you were wondering, I have not spoken about spinning on this channel in a very long time, and if you're somewhat new here, I had just barely started spinning last summer after Flock Fiber Festival. I had purchased this Kromsky drop spindle and really wanted to just try out spinning for the first time, and I had since gotten this other drop spindle and had made like 2 to 3, I think I made 3 little tiny skeins of yarn. So this was the most recent little skein of yarn that I made out of this drop spindle. This was from fiber from Little Fiber Co. And I actually have a lot of fiber in stash to spin up. I was graciously gifted by a few different viewers some fiber, which is pretty rare. Like, viewers usually don't send me stuff. So I was very surprised and like really thankful when I started sharing about spinning and people like sent me some fiber that they had and wanted to share. And I'm really excited to use that. And I just feel like I don't want to do it on the drop spindle. The drop spindle is very slow and I just don't like the idea of doing like a 4-ounce spin on a drop spindle. And I do have a lot of like skills that I want to develop with drafting, and I just feel like having something like a wheel or an e-spinner will definitely help me with that process, and I definitely have an interest in investing in some sort of tool like that. So I've kind of put spinning on a hiatus while I do my own research and decide what the best wheel or e-spinner for me to get is. I have a feeling I know which one I'm going to get, but I'll share with you when I purchase it. I'm aiming for an e-spinner just because I'm not really ready to have a big wheel take up as much physical space in my house as a wheel does, and the price points of some e-spinners are just a lot more palatable and fits in my budget a little bit better than a full wheel. So if you're curious of my spinning, I think I'll have some more spinning somewhat soon, but not sure when. Just wanted to give you an update in case you thought maybe I dropped the craft, which I didn't completely. It's just a slow burn. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. That was everything I wanted to share. So if you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much for sticking around. I'm so happy that you joined me today. I hope you had some enjoyment listening to my projects and seeing some yarn and maybe getting some inspiration for your own knitting life. You can find me on Instagram and here on YouTube. Feel free to subscribe if you like what you saw and want to be updated every time I post a new video. Thanks for joining. Stay warm this winter, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.